Good morning, colleagues. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Melody, I don't know if it's time for us to start.
You may start, sir.
Thank you very much. Good morning, colleagues, and welcome to all of you who are joining us today during our Open Access Week event. This event this year is in a good position in that it's related to the UWC Research Week. The Research Week was from the 24th of October until yesterday. And as you all know, the Open Access Week was running from the 24th of October until tomorrow, the 30th of October. For this year, the Research Week theme was UWC's contribution to the SDGs 2030 agenda, which speaks directly to the agenda for today's session. As a library, we also contributed to the Research Week. Dr. Nyerkut and myself, we were part of the activities, and she spoke on IFLA's 2035 call to action for climate change and how we as a library are linked to the SDGs. And I had a brief session on Open for Climate Justice, how knowledge sharing is a human right. One of the activities that we are involved in during this week, there is a lucky draw. If you look at the program, you'll see there is a QR code that you can scan and you will stand a chance to win a shopping voucher. One of the things that we're doing this week as well is that all our library staff allocated 2 articles to upload on our research repository. That's as part of promoting open access. Next slide, please. Next slide, please.
Apologies, just a technical difficulty. One moment, please.
Next slide will be just talking about the housekeeping rules so that we can keep up with time. We have 3 main speakers. Each of the speakers are provided 30 minutes. And then after the 30 minutes presentation, there'll be a 5-minute Q&A session for each of the speakers. So all the attendees are muted currently. So if you need to ask a question, you will just need to raise your hand, and you can post any questions or comments on the chat box. And Elisa is working in the background there. She'll read those questions or comments to the meeting. And there will also be an opportunity at the end of the session to ask any questions that you may have missed after each speaker. So there will be that opportunity as well. The session will be recorded, and then we'll make the slides available via our institutional repository. So we'll post the link towards the end. Just as the last slide, just to acknowledge the team that tried to put this event today together. Mark, Annalisa, Kanyisa, Jack, and Errol, they've been great behind the scenes and trying to make sure that this event is a success. I'll now hand over to Professor Joseph Franz, who is the Deputy Vice Chancellor for Research and Innovation at UWC, who will be doing the opening address. Thank you very much.
Good morning, colleagues. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Alfred, for the opportunity, and thank you to Dr. Nyerkut and a team for allowing me just to say a few words to welcome. Yes, as you heard, we have just completed an exciting research week, and now we're on to the next activity in terms of this next week, in terms of open access. It's really interesting and exciting to see how we can engage on these platforms, and move from one space into this without having to and listen to an engaging conversation. And so I'm very excited that we could have this here today. But let me not talk about my own things. Let me do what I have to do, and that is the opening for this morning. So good morning, everybody. It really gives me great pleasure to welcome you to our second International Open Access Week celebration. And yes, as I said, this is on the tail end of a successful research week, and I'm really excited that we can share what it is that we are doing here at UWC and how we are connecting, not only in our own spaces, but also in the spaces internationally and in Africa. This for me is really exciting. International Open Access Week is a global event, and it's celebrated annually across the globe, and UWC participates in this. But I also want to just share with you colleagues this morning what we at UWC have been doing to drive open access here at UWC. We have been engaging on this topic since 2013, and there's been a series of events that have led us to where we are today. Open access publications has been a conversation that has been going on and has been supported by the university for many years now. Yes, we realize that there's a large fee to open access, and we are engaging around how can we facilitate this, that we don't pay to read and pay to publish. But it opens a new world for us when our work, our publications is there for everybody to see and to engage with, and not only for a select few. It really talks about what we are wanting to do here this morning around equity. We even have moved in terms of the library, in terms of hosting our thesis, electronic thesis, our dissertation repository. And so even students are able to put their work out there and can their work can be read without having published it, but their thesis are able to be read because it's open access. And so we are trying to do all of these things here at the University of the Western Cape to drive this. But this year's theme, Open for Climate Justice, when I saw this, I thought, what is this now? But I realized how this theme, climate justice, is an equity issue, how it is able to talk to us in how do we create pathways to make knowledge more equitable, to share knowledge, to share opportunities. And it serves as a means also to address inequities that shape the impact of climate change and our response to them. And I'm so excited to see the panelists here this morning, that it's cross-cutting. It's not just one. When you think about climate change, maybe you think only the scientists will be talking, but no, it's not so. Today we have presentations that cut across law, biosciences, and theology and religion. And this really speaks to the opportunity to view a common challenge through different lenses. I'm excited that we are able to do this because I'm advocating for interdisciplinarity. Let's look at the social challenges that we are faced with through different lenses and see how we can find solutions that will be there for our society that we are serving. And so in the spirit that I open this session, we invite UWC staff and students, as well as the guests who have joined us, to share what they have learned, to help inspire others in our communities, and to internalize the philosophy of open access and to promote the message of climate change. So be welcome and enjoy the session. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof, for the opening. Our first speaker it will be Dennis Nicholson. I don't know, Dennis, if you want to put your camera on and your presentation while I'm introducing you. Dennis has retired from University of Witwatersrand in Johannesburg in December 2020. She has over 38 years of professional library experience in various positions. She managed the Corporate Services Office for 25 years at Wits. Her last post was Scholarly Communications Librarian, providing advice to lecturers, resources for academics, postgraduates, and undergraduate students on copyright, plagiarism, research integrity, publishing, how to prevent predatory publishing practices, how to apply for article processing charges, and assisting on management of copyright clearances for the University of Witwatersrand. She is well recognized internationally, regionally, and in South Africa for her advocacy in promotion of access to knowledge, open access, and copyright awareness, and her campaign for more balanced copyright laws in South Africa. She has been a member of many international, regional, and local copyright committees and has presented at many conferences around the world. She has also been involved in many copyright and related projects through IFLA, UNESCO, WIPO, Creative Commons, CopySouth, the African Copyright and Access Knowledge Projects, and others. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dennis Nicholson. Over to you, Dennis.
Good morning, everyone. Should I leave my camera on while I'm talking?
Yes, you may.
Yes, Dennis.
Okay. I want to thank Shirlene, Alfred, and the UWC for inviting me to present at your Open Science Colloquium today. I'll be speaking about the Copyright Amendment Bill and openness. I was asked to give a brief report of the bill's process and its current status, and then to focus on part of Section 12, 19, and 39 of the bill to highlight how the bill enables or facilitates openness. And my slides will be made available after the webinar. So just for a brief background, the bill's genesis was in 2009, which is 13 years ago, when the DTI started commissioning research to amend the 44-year-old Copyright Act of 1978. The bill was first published for public comment in July 2015. The Department of Trade and Industry held various workshops and a multi-stakeholder conference at the time and called for written submissions, which were taken into account in the version that was presented to the Portfolio Committee on Trade and Industry. And the bill was before the committee from 2017 to September 2022, so quite some 5 years. There were various calls for comments and 2 parliamentary public hearings, resulting in a number of amended versions of the bill. I spoke at the in Parliament in the Liasa slot in August 2017. It was the only slot that was provided for education or libraries, which was quite disappointing, but at least I had the opportunity to speak. Liasa and I both presented at the online hearings in August 2021. The President failed to act on the bill for 15 months, despite Section 79(1) of the Constitution obliging him to do so. This section says that he either has to assent to the bill or send it back to Parliament for review, just for constitutional issues, no other issues. Pressure from the US Trade Representative, the EU, and multinationals and local rights holders on the one hand, and a Concord case against him by Blind SA on the other hand, caused the President to send the bill back to Parliament for review on the 16th of June 2022 on constitutional issues related to fair use, exceptions for libraries, archives, museums and galleries, and education and academic activities and computer programs. There were more public comments, new amendments, another round of comments, and more debates from mid-21 until August 2022. The final bill, B13D of 2017, was passed by the National Assembly on the 1st of September 2022. The DA, the FF+, the ACDP, and the EFF rejected the bill. The EFF in principle supports the bill, but there's one clause that they're not happy about. It was removed in a past session of the Parliament relating to retrospective royalties for artists. This was removed because it had constitutional issues, but the EFF they've insisted that it be brought back into the bill. This issue will have to be dealt with as it passes through the provinces. So the next step for the bill is for the National Council of Provinces and the 9 provincial legislators will now have to deliberate, call for new public comments, and possibly hold public hearings as well, so that they can look at this bill as in its entirety, because it was retagged from a national bill, which was Section 75 bill, to a Section 76 bill, which has to go to the provinces. So that is why the bill is now going through the whole process of the NCOP and the 9 legislators. So it is going to still be a long while before the bill is approved and then sent back to the president for assent. So until then, the current copyright law remains in place. The bill introduces fair use in section 12A, which provides that in addition to uses specifically authorized in other sections, fair use in respect of a work or the performance of that work for purposes such as the following does not infringe copyright in that work. So these are acts that you are allowed to do under fair use. You can use fair use or copy for fair use for research, private study, or personal use, including the use of a lawful copy of the work at a different time with a different device. So that allows format shifting.
Hi, morning, how are you? I'm well,
Criticism
thanks.
or review of that work or of another work.
You can open the window
Reporting-
there if you want to.
One moment, please, Professor Nicholson. Can attendees kindly ensure that you are on mute, please?
Can I carry on? So reporting current events, perhaps in a broadcast or newspaper, scholarly teaching and education, scholarship, comment, illustration, parody, satire, caricature, cartoon, tribute, homage, or pastiche, which is very helpful now, preservation of and access to the collections of libraries, archives, and museums, and ensuring proper performance of public administration. In the last round of amendments, they tried to remove research and private study and personal use, scholarship, teaching and education, and preservation for libraries. And we actually objected strongly, and they have put it back, thank goodness. Now, fair use has 4 factors or criteria that determine whether one may copy from a work or not. 12AB states that in determining whether an act done in relation to a work constitutes fair use, all relevant factors shall be taken into account, including but not limited to. And these are the 4 factors of fair use you have to apply before you can make a copy. You have to look at the nature of the work in question, the amount and substantiality of the part of the work affected by the act in relation to the whole work. So how much are you taking of the whole work? Is it a fair amount? And the purpose and character of the use, including whether you're using it for different purpose or whether it's commercial or non-profit, whether it's for library or educational purposes. So that all makes a difference depending on the purpose and character. And then the substitution effect of the act on the potential market for the work in question. This is where, if you're making a copy, are you going to be competing with the exploitation of that work in the market? For example, are you going to make a copy and make a profit from it or sell it? If so, that would not be fair use because you're not complying with that point 4. You would have to keep to those 4 factors each time you copy something for fair use. 12AC requires that for the purposes of paragraph A and B, the source as well as the name of the author shall be mentioned if it appears on the work. So if you are copying for fair use, obviously you must make an acknowledgement of the author and the source. If the 4 criteria do not apply, then you may not copy in terms of fair use. For example, opponents of the bill keep saying in the media and in articles that institutions are going to make 1 copy of a textbook and make 2,000 copies for all their students. Well, that is serious copyright infringement. It is not fair use. You just have to look at the nature of the work, the amount, the purpose, and the substitute effect to know that that would be copyright infringement. Fair use provides flexibility and more clarity for information users in the digital world and allows use without permission to create transformative, derivative, and new works. Example, open educational resources, allows text and data mining for research, allows the use of orphan works when needed quickly. Now, there is a special clause for orphan works where rights holders are not traceable. It's quite a cumbersome process to be able to use orphan works. But if you were wanting to use, say, an article or an image or something for a lecture tomorrow, you wouldn't have time to go through the process that the clause on orphan works provides for. So you would be able to call up fair use and you'd be able to give it to your students next day. Fair use also allows preservation of the access to the collections of libraries, archives, and museums, even if the specific exceptions in Section 19C for libraries and archives do not serve the purpose required. So there are specific exceptions in Section 19C, but if they don't work for the purpose that you're wanting to use it, you can then turn to fair use and see, can I use it under these circumstances? The fair use is quite flexible. It is flexible in the digital world, particularly it applies to all work and addresses the digital environment, which fair dealing does not. Fair dealing is limited to a closed list of acts, mainly in a print environment. Just to remember that our current copyright law has not been changed for education or libraries or any of our sectors since 1978, and that predates the birth of the internet by 5 years. So it specifically relates to print environment. The fair use will address ever-changing technologies, transformative uses where you build on a copyright work to make a different work or use it for a different purpose, text and data mining, which is computational analysis for research, new innovations, 3D creations, artificial intelligence, unforeseen uses in the future. So it future-proofs the laws so that we don't have to keep changing the law every time new technologies or new inventions appear. It applies to them in the future as well. And America has encoded their fair use in their copyright code since 1976. And to date, they haven't needed to change it because it still applies today. And the use of orphan works, as I said, will be able to be used for, within a short period. Resource sharing for lecturers, researchers, students, library staff, etc. And it enables the creation of open education resources as long as you apply the 4 criteria. The fair use is an enabler, not a destroyer of creativity. All users and producers of information need fair use in the digital environment to use, reuse, remix, and create new or derivative works. So I've given you a number of helpful resources on fair use. The first one is just a short film. I'm actually in it briefly, but it just explains, gives some examples of what fair use is and how you apply it. And the Q&As, I actually, when I was at WITS, I set up a LibGuide just to dispel many of the myths and misinformation that were being circulated and are still being circulated by opponents of the fair use in media and in webinars, etc. And then just explaining the 4 factors that define fair use, another example about fair use, and various other resources. And then there's a number of best practices that have been developed for various stakeholders on how to use fair use. So there's one for research, one for education, there's one for filmmakers and various other sector stakeholders. So those are actually very helpful. Just while I'm talking about fair use, you may be interested in attending a hybrid seminar on fair use on the 13th of December this year at UCT Law School. It will be face-to-face, but limited seating, and then online. Professor Tom Lipinski from the Department of Information Sciences at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee in the US will be presenting on this topic, and he'll be giving a number of examples and how fair use is applied, etc. I will send Alfred the invitation so that you can share it with you and circulate it, but I think it would be quite an interesting seminar to attend. Also, please diarize the 23rd of January and the 26th of January next year, where we will be arranging 2 right to research seminars, one in Pretoria and one in UCT. And there will be various themes and topics related to AI, text and data mining, climate change, digitization of our cultural heritage, and others, various case studies and the studies about how copyright and licensing, etc., are barriers to research, the right to research, and looking at the possibility in the future of having a treaty at international level on the right to research. So please just diarize those dates. We will be sending out the invitations in the next week or so, and I'll certainly send it to you all. Okay, then there are various useful exceptions for education and academic activities in Section 12D of the bill, but I was asked just to focus on Section 12D 7A to E. These are particularly relating to openness or open, how to make material open. The Section 12D7A of the Copyright Amendment Bill enables open access via open licenses, for example, a Creative Commons license, or via an open access institutional repository. Currently, you have to get permission from publishers to check, if you want to put anything up on a repository or make it open access, or you have to check their policies on the Sherpa Romeo website, which gives you what their policies are, and sometimes they don't allow it, sometimes they do. So the bill will now allow the author of a scientific or other contribution, despite granting the publisher or editor an exclusive right of use, to make the final manuscript version that has appeared in a collection available to the public, either under an open license or by depositing in an open access institutional repository. This is on condition that the work is a result of the research received at least 50% of its funding from the state. So basically, this gives access to the public who has helped fund the research through their taxes. So if your research is being 50% of it has been received by state or state funders, then you would be allowed to put a copy of your manuscript copy of that publication up, even though you may have given an exclusive right and all your rights to a publisher. Before, you would have to get permission or check the Sherpa Romeo. Now you would be able to put it up straight away. 12D7B, in the case of a contribution published in a collection that is issued periodically, at least annually, an agreement may provide for an embargo for up to 1 year from the date of the first publication in that periodical. This would delay open access, but allow it when the embargo period expires. And this is something that you may have to come across, where a publisher may insist that you have an embargo period before it goes up. When the contribution is made available to the public, as mentioned above, the place of the first publication must be properly acknowledged. So where it first was published, obviously the publication itself, it must be acknowledged properly. Then 12D7D allows librarians to assist authors to deposit in an institutional repository or to attach a CC license to a manuscript version of the published paper, which can then be deposited in the repository. And this is one way of avoiding the embargo period. If the author is allowed to make a CC license open access version of their manuscript, or even the published version, the library then can take that CC license version and put it on the repository without having to wait for the embargo period to expire, because that CC license is a lawful open access document. In 12D7E states that any agreement that denies the author any of the rights contemplated in this section shall be unenforceable. So for example, if a publisher says that you cannot do this in a contract, but the law says you can, then that contract would be unenforceable. And there's another section I'll talk about just a bit later, also about unenforceable contracts. Then section 19B, computer programs. I've put up the clauses, sub-clauses for you, but I won't discuss the whole section. I'll just focus on 19B1. Sorry, there's someone with the, please mute. Okay, thanks. 19B1 provides that a person having a right to use a copy of a computer program may, without the authorization of the copyright owner, observe, study, or test the functioning of the program in order to determine the ideas and principles which underlie any element of the program, if that person does so while performing any of the acts of loading, displaying, executing, transmitting, or storing the program, which they are entitled to perform. This basically allows interoperability and also re-engineering and people to work on a legal copy of a copyright program. So the main point of this section is that it enables interoperability, which also enhances the development and application of open source licenses, leading to more openness and accessibility. Now, the current Act has very limited exceptions for libraries and archives and no exceptions for museums and galleries. There are no exceptions for preservation of cultural heritage or digitization. Access is necessary to use any material in libraries and archives, museums and galleries, but if the material or collections are not accessible or preserved for perpetuity, they will be lost to society. The section 19B of the bill, C of the bill, allows libraries, including legal deposit libraries, to engage in resource sharing, making of replacement copies, purchasing material, either from South Africa or externally, format shifting, converting to new formats and technologies, digitization, preservation, and ongoing digital curation to preserve our documentary records, cultural heritage, and special collection. So this is a major positive function for us as librarians. We've always had to get permission for digitization. Now we will be able to digitize for preservation and accessibility purposes. Libraries may also provide materials for exhibitions and non-commercial commemorative events. I'll just give you an example. When I was at BITS, the German Institute and our history department wanted to just commemorate the 20th anniversary of the falling of the Berlin Wall. So they asked me, could they just put up a wall up on the piazza, temporary wall, and could they put up, like posters and newspaper articles, recordings, anything related to the event, just for the morning, so that people walking past could come and have a look and, benefit from the information. Well, we were told when we inquired about copyright that they would have to pay copyright for every single item that they used and obviously pay for it. They didn't have a budget for it, so they had to cancel the event. So in the end, all they did was just put up a temporary wall and students put graffiti on it. So it didn't help, and it wasn't a commercial event. It was clearly a commemorative and a historical event, and for information only. So now libraries will be allowed to provide materials for such exhibitions as long as they are non-commercial. Also, the bill allows users to use whole films or musical works for the purpose of teaching and learning. The current law is very vague on this. It appears that you can only make extracts, but it's not quite clear whether you can use a whole film or whole music work for purpose of teaching and learning, but this specifically allows it. So if someone's doing film studies or literature, you can watch a whole film related to it, or musical work. You can play, and hear that whole musical work while you're doing music studies, for example. Libraries also can loan works, allow access to material on digital platforms, and engage in interlibrary loans. As mentioned before, libraries can also assist authors to deposit manuscript copies in institutional repositories. Now, Section 19D, I'm talking about Section 19D because persons with disabilities also require the same exceptions that everybody else does. They're also needed for teaching and learning, for civic and personal purposes and others. So I thought I should include this. So the bill has exceptions for people with various disabilities to access material via accessible formats. For example, Braille for blind persons, more visual formats for deaf or dyslexic persons and other disabilities. A person with a disability or a person who serves persons with disabilities, including an authorized entity, such as a library or a university disability rights unit, may, without the authorization of the copyright owner, export to or import from another country any legal copy of an accessible format copy of a work referred to in Section 19B1 for distribution, or to make it available to persons with a disability, as long as such activity is undertaken on a non-profit basis by that person. Currently, they have to get permission each time, before they can even buy anything or convert anything. Fair use, as well as all the exceptions for education and research, libraries and archives, museums and galleries also apply to them, as I said. To enable cross-border exchange of accessible format, South Africa must ratify the 2013 Marrakesh Treaty for the Visually Impaired. South Africa has committed to do this once the Copyright Amendment Bill has finally been passed. And this will allow a lot more interchange with the other countries of, where they've created accessible formats. You can exchange them or buy them. Currently, you have to make your own accessible format. So if Botswana's got a copy of The Long Walk to Freedom and South Africa's got one, both of them have to make their own copies in Braille, for example. They can't exchange a copy. So the current law is very, won't allow that, whereas the bill will now allow it. Now, impatient with ongoing delays with the bill, Blind SA, assisted by Section 27, instituted action in the Gauteng High Court, Pretoria in 2021 against Parliament, the President, and the Department of Trade and Industry, and I think it's called Cooperation now, and DIRCO, the Department of International Relations, because they claimed that the current act is unconstitutional. So Judge J. Mbongwe ruled that the current copyright law is unconstitutional regarding people with disabilities. Judgment was reserved for a while, but on the 21st of September 2022, in a unanimous judgment, the Constitutional Court confirmed the High Court's finding that the Copyright Act 1978 is unconstitutional and unfairly discriminatory to the extent that it fails to provide for people with visual and print disabilities. It is the first instance of this court to require copyright legislation to provide for an accessible format shifting provision on the basis that constitutional rights are limited by overly restrictive copyright laws. The highest court in the country has therefore ordered Parliament to remedy the constitutional invalidity of the current Act within 24 months. As an interim relief, the court has read in or included in the current Act a provision that immediately permits blind or visually impaired persons to convert books into accessible formats without requiring authorization of the copyright holder. This is an amazing victory because every conversion they've ever had to make to date has had to be cleared and paid for as well.
Dennis, you have less than 10 minutes. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay, all right. A whole new world of information will now be opened up for blind and visually impaired persons. Hopefully this will put an end to the book famine they have had to endure for decades. Now, Section 13(9)(b) provides for a contract to be unenforceable if a term of a contract purports to prevent or restrict the doing of a lawful act in terms of this act. In other words, where a contract overrides a lawful exception allowed in the bill. Just an example or an analogy. The Road Traffic Act allows vehicles to pass through a green robot or green traffic light. Now, if the contract or the publisher's contract says you can't go through a green robot, that would be unenforceable, but also unlawful because the Road Traffic Act allows you to do it. So this particular term or section just will enable, say, for example, a publisher trying to stop people doing certain things that are lawful, which they currently do, it won't be allowed. It will be unenforceable. So in this example, if the contract says that you can't go through a red robot where the law says you can, then that would be unenforceable and unlawful. The Section 39(b) provides that the provision above does not prohibit or otherwise interfere with open licenses or voluntary dedications of a work to the public domain. So this will facilitate the creation of OERs, open science, open data, and other open context. So it doesn't interfere with how open licenses work. This also means that open licenses are not affected, especially since they do not override any copyright exceptions. Also, if authors place their copyright works in the public domain, example under CC 1.0 universal public domain dedication, this means they waive all their copyright in the work and it can be used totally free and without any restriction. So that is what is meant by voluntary dedication to the public. I've just given you a number of resources of books, journals, images, films, education resources, Creative Commons licenses, also the Project Gutenberg, all books that are out of copyright or where the copyright is expired, or you can download the whole book if you want to. The same with the Directive of Open Access Journals and books and repositories, etc. Sorry, and then just giving you the signs. If you see that little sign on the right, you'll know that that is a Creative Commons license. And then just read the license. You don't get permission, just follow the license. Then these are just some resources about the copyright bill, together with the link to the final bill approved by the National Assembly. So at the top, you can link on that and find the details of the final bill. Now, in conclusion, the bill has been highly contentious and has polarized stakeholders. It's been a minefield, in fact. It's been a battle between access to knowledge and human rights versus multinational and rights holders who are fighting to protect their profit margins and long-standing privileges in copyright law. Parliament is under constitutional imperative to replace the Apartheid-era Copyright Act with a statute that is modern, inclusive, and gives proper effect to the rights of the stakeholders in line with our Bill of Rights. As the bill proceeds through its next phase through the National Council of Provinces and the provincial legislators, we must all be proactive and promote the bill in our provinces. We must also make written submissions from our institutions, associations, or in our personal capacities and or apply to speak at parliamentary hearings to ensure that this bill proceeds and is finally assented to by our President. If you need assistance with this, please contact me at the time. And please look out, in Government Gazette and any information about the bill, look out for calls for submissions. In his recent Heritage Day speech, President Ramaphosa supported the bill, so we hope this time around he will sign the bill into law. Thereafter, draft regulations will be published for public comment. Once approved, the new amended Copyright Act will finally be implemented. In conclusion, the bill quantum leaps South Africa into the 21st century. It is modern, forward-looking, and goes a long way to redressing omissions, imbalances, discrimination, restrictions, and unconstitutionality in the current copyright law. It enables open access, open licensing, and resource sharing in the digital space. It is urgent and needs to be passed as soon as possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dennis, for informative presentation. It has been 30 years, but we still believe that this bill will come into law in our lifetime. As I'm saying, it's been since 2009. It has been coming a long way. But thank you once again for the presentation. Colleagues, we have a few minutes. If there are any burning questions for Dennis before I introduce our next speaker.
On the chat, Dennis, there is a question from Mark, and it's asking, how does the fair use address artificial intelligence?
This is a very difficult question, and I probably won't be able to answer you, but there will be a number of talks on AI at this seminar in January, and I do invite you to come. AI is a problem in the sense that even the AI community are calling for copyright, AI to have copyright ownership. But copyright applies to humans. And there have been a number of cases where a monkey pressed a button on a camera, and there's a big case about whether the monkey should have copyright in it. And it was said, no, that humans, it only applies to humans. But just recently in America, one person who did an artistic AI work seems to have got copyright protection. So it's starting a whole new of possibly copyright protection. But fair use would apply if you're using the applying the 4 criteria. If you're using it for creation in an AI, it certainly would be able to be used. But you have to apply those 4 criteria. I don't know if that answers your question.
Thank you. Melody, I think there was a hand.
Yes, I would like to ask a question, please.
Sure.
The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for the very insightful presentation. I want to find out what you meant when you said the president fails to act on the bill. And secondly, don't you think that there are some external influences in this bill, and it's not that simplistic to can just have it signed like you are suggesting that it needs to be signed into law very, very quickly? How far are we from being influenced by external actors? Thank you.
Thank you. Unfortunately, yes, you're right. There is a strong influence from international, multinationals, but also strong opposition from rights holders, collecting agencies like Delro and Samro and Sampro and others, PASO, all collecting societies, and some creatives in South Africa. A lot of them are concerned about the profit margin, obviously, and keep claiming that fair use is too broad, and it's we're just going to copy everything and anything, and that it's a carte blanche for piracy. It is not, because there are 4 criteria you have to apply. Whereas fair dealing today, in our current law, is very restrictive, but it also has no guidelines. You don't know what is fair and not, and very often you ask for permission where possibly you don't need to because there's no guidelines. Whereas fair use has 4 criteria, and if you follow them, it should, you should be able to use it, or you'll know you can't use it. But what is worrying is that the president did sit on it for 15 months because he had lots of lobbying from all angles. He had people who wanted the bill writing and saying, please, please support it. We had international people like IFLA and Eiffel and all that were writing, supporting the bill. But then on the other hand, there was strong opposition to the bill, asking for it to be stalled or withdrawn. In fact, the US trade representative actually threatened trade sanctions, you know, the AGOA agreement and others affecting our tariffs, trade tariffs, if we pass this bill. They were very open about it, and they even had a whole presentations where we also made submissions to America. They had it in America, where people had to say whether they wanted this to happen or not. And most people, the majority of them, said no, they don't want this to happen. We don't want it to affect the trade, but we also want the bill. The EU were more secretive in that they were writing to the president and asking him to, the ambassador of the EU in South Africa wrote to the president saying, please stall this, you can't allow this to go through. We did find to librarians in Germany and IFLA, they managed to get it through like a PIA Act. They managed to get information about this, and they only had consulted with rights holders and rights, organizations. They had consulted with no one in the educational library sectors. And so it was very biased. But I think the president didn't, he sat on it because he didn't know what to do. He was getting pressure from everyone. Blind SA then took him to court and said, in terms of section 79(1) of the Constitution, it says you have to, within a reasonable period, sign the bill or send it back to constitutional issues. We still believe that there were no constitutional issues, but he sent it back, I think, to be careful. And then there was a whole new change of the committee after elections. So the bill then was that again, and that's what was.
I'm sorry, Dennis, I'm conscious of time. We still have two more speakers. But I think you've covered the question.
Okay.
And if there are still issues that needs to be raised, maybe we'll have time at the end of the program, and then maybe we can go back.
Sure.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Okay, colleagues, our next speaker is Professor Ilyas Swart. I don't know if Prof. Swart can turn on his camera and put up his presentation. Prof. Swart holds the position of a professor in the Department of Religion and Theology at UWC, and until the end of 2019, he also held the position of Creole Visiting Professor of International Diaconia at VID Specialized University in Norway. He has initiated and led or co-led several national and international team of research projects since the early 2000s, which has led to an extensive research and publication record across the related fields of religion and development, religion and social welfare, religion and society, and Christian diaconia. He currently acts as a co-project leader of the NRF-funded project, the South African German Research Hub on Religion and Sustainability. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Professor Swart. Professor Swart, over to you.
Thank you very much, Alfred. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can hear you clearly.
Okay. So yes, there again is the title of my topic, of my presentation. Sorry, now it doesn't want to move. Okay. So yes, I was approached to speak about the following publication in 2021 in volume 77, number 2 of the open access journal HTS Theologische Studies, Theological Studies. And this was a special collection of 10 articles under the special collection title, Youth, Faith, Climate Change and Environmental Consciousness, a Case for Sustainable Development. This was a collaboration that I co-edited with 2 younger scholars, respectively from the University of Pretoria and the Humboldt University of Berlin. Here's our team. So myself, Dr. Jacques Bekes, a senior lecturer in practical theology at the University of Pretoria, and Juliana Stork, John S. Mabiti Research Fellow at Humboldt University of Berlin. How did it come about that we collaborated? We share a collaborative history. It goes back quite some time. With Jacques Bekers, I was his doctoral supervisor, and we kept close contact, and we've ever since. With Juliana Stork, through my collaborations with researchers at Humboldt University, I've met her and we've developed a relationship. So, sorry, this thing is here on the way. This publication then is the outcome of collaboration, but also mentorship. I'm the older scholar amongst the team, and I've published quite a number of these special collections. And for my co-editors, this was their first time, so I also thought I could play some kind of mentorship role. So I'm trying to go to the next slide.
Would you like me to try, Professor?
Oh, there it goes. I don't know, sometimes it gets stuck for a while and then. Okay, so in September 2020, we launched a call for papers on the topic, Youth, Faith, Climate Change and Environmental Consciousness. The hypothesis in our call for papers was two-legged. The youth stand central in the debates concerning environmental awareness, ecological injustices and climate change discourses. This makes them a very relevant focus of research related to environmental and ecological concerns. Although the youth and environment and environment and religion are respectively vibrant focus areas of international research, they are respectively missing the component of religion and the youth. If religion and religious faith is added to the mix of youth, climate change, and environmental consciousness, we have an under-researched focus area. Why then the youth and the environment as focus areas? The youth, as I in fact already then indicated, are at the center of debates concerning the environment and ecological injustice. We can claim they are concerned about environmental problems, we can claim, and they show a willingness to act. This is also what we wrote in our call for papers. Young people find themselves right in the center of debates about ecological injustice, environmental awareness, and climate change discourses and practices. Youth movements worldwide, such as Extinction Rebellion and Fridays for Future, demonstrate that youth are concerned about environmental problems and ready to become active in climate movements. Their willingness to act on their own behalf makes them one of the most important and interesting groups to learn more about in relation to the challenge of building a deeper awareness of environmental issues. So I want to place my present today also in the context of some online research which I also did then for this presentation. What I can call explorative study into the respective worlds of practice and activism and scholarship and publication with regards to youth, climate change, and environmental consciousness. This reveals such an exploratory research. If one goes to the internet and starts to do research, one discovers that youth environmental activists, in fact, enjoy close to celebrity status today. Articles such as the following that one discovers on the internet: 10 young climate activists leading the way on global climate action. 10 African youth climate activists change the face of the planet. Amongst them, in that list of 10 African youth activists, are also a number of South Africans. Youth Voices for Change, 4 young climate action leaders we admire. And then the last one, 19 young climate activists you should be following on social media. And these are just a few examples. One can go on and list articles. But also One also finds articles from the world of scholarship and publication, which suggest a growing interest in the topical focus of youth agency and environmental activism. So just to list a few examples, very recently, a few authors published the article "Young People, Climate Activism: A Review of the Literature." A special issue was also published this year in the Journal of Youth Studies, Young People and Environmental Activism, the Transformation of Democratic Politics. There's at the moment the Journal Sustainability as a special issue that's in progress, Youth Climate Activism and Sustainable Civic and Political Engagement. In the Human Rights Law Review, also recently, Daily published an article, Climate Competence, Youth Climate Activism and International Human Rights Law. So very interesting that this is also now attracting attention within the field of law. The Conversation has published quite a number of articles on youth climate activism. And then a few years ago, a book chapter was also published on the Sustainable Development Goals and the role of youth-driven innovation for social change in a book with the title Youth as Architects of Social Change. One can go further in terms of an exploratory research and discover that South African youth are also a vibrant part of the global youth climate activism movement. A case in point is the existence of the South African Youth Climate Action Plan and the South African Youth Climate Change Coalition. One also finds articles from the world of practice and activism that suggest such vibrancy. For example, this article, 5 incredible young South Africans who are taking climate change into their own hands. On the right hand, you see this picture of one of those 5 incredible young South Africans, Ayaka Melitafa, and she was quoted saying, "I want people to know that not only privileged people are aware of climate change." So this is also a very interesting feature, that many of these young people come from the so-called margins of society. And then there's also emerging South African academic response, an article in that same special issue in Journal of Youth Studies, a South African article, Empowering Youth as Change Agents for Climate Change in South Africa, Challenges, Caveats and Course Corrections, and an article in 2021 by Nkrumah, Eco-Activism, Youth and Climate Justice in South Africa, in the journal Environmental Claims Journal. Okay, so at this point in time, 2 caveats can be noted. And this brings me back to the second part of the thesis of our call for papers, where we said that, or claimed that, or stated that if religion and religious faith is added to the mix of youth climate change and environmental consciousness, we have an under-researched focus area. However, this despite, there are evidence that actors from the world of practice and activism are interested in faith-motivated youth to stand up for the environment. Sorry, I have a bit of technical difficulty, so that's why I take some time at points to continue. But also there is some evidence of an emerging academic and scholarly response. So, coming back to the first caveat, the evidence that actors from the world of practice and activism are interested in faith-motivated youth to stand up for the environment. Example is the WWF, which are busy with the initiative. And in one of their documents, they wrote, given their large numbers, people who are motivated by their faith can move mountains if they want to. This is especially true of people in their teens and 20s, who make up nearly half of our global population. Imagine the different faith-motivated youth can make. imagine the difference faith-motivated youth can make if they become advocates for protecting wildlife and wild places. And then also another actor, as example, is the World Council of Churches, who has started a program to advance the cause of climate justice with and for children and youth in churches. The second caveat, there also some evidence of an emerging academic and scholarly response. Very interesting. In the International Journal of Climate Change last year, an article was published by Baring et al. Environmental Awareness, Religious Attitudes and Climate Change. Preliminary considerations to youth dialogue and ecology. The authors write, amongst others, we propose that the youth religious viewpoints are in dialogue with the perceptions of the environment, citing recent empirical reports. Another interesting example is an academic NGO partnership. The NGO is Faith for Our Planet, who is now collaborating with the Duke University's Divinity School. And they now have a Youth Interfaith Leadership Fellowship program on climate change. And there you see on the right-hand side the call for applications. Okay. So this brings me then to the journal in which our special collection was published and its publisher, AOSIS. And I think this is also fitting to have this slide in the context of this colloquium. And just to say that AOSIS stands for, is the acronym for African Online Scientific Information Systems. So HTS, a bit of information, background information, is the oldest theological journal founded in 1943. According to its own self-description, it is an acclaimed open access journal with broad coverage that promotes multi, inter, and transdisciplinary religious aspects of studies in the international theological arena. At the beginning of 2009, the former title owner, the Neder-Dutch Reformed Church of Africa, entered into a publishing agreement with AOSIS, hence making it South Africa's first open access journal in the field of theological and religious studies. AOSIS took over as the title owner of HTS in 2019. The purpose of the transfer was to strengthen HTS as a fully independent, multidisciplinary and denomination neutral international journal in the religious studies. It's today the largest theological journal indexed in Scopus and ranked in the top 25% of journals. It achieved the 7th highest number of citations in its field internationally in 2018. Since 2010, more than 1 million unique readers visited the HTS website, again showing the benefit of open access. It's accredited by Clarivate Analytics, Elsevier Scopus, Norwegian Scientific Register, and Scielo South Africa. In 2019, HTS Theological Studies, the Scopus H index was 12, that was top in Africa, and its Scielo South Africa H5 index 14. So some information, AOSIS, perhaps I can just mention, they are very impressive in the publication at the moment of 45 open access scholarly journals across disciplines. And to date, they've also published over 70 open access scholarly books, that is since 2015. Okay, now what is special collection or topical collection? So this publication is referred to, is called a special collection. First, to say that thematic article special collections are today a prominent feature of HTS issues since 2014 in accordance with the new international trend. What is a special collection or topical collection? So here I want to present a synthesis from current formulations. If one goes onto the internet to particular journals, but including my own HTS experience. It's a new publication model, replacing the more traditional model of special issue. It is a select group of scientific contributions focused on a central theme, topic, or research direction. It differs from special issues as articles are published continuously and are not necessarily assigned to one issue. Unlike special issues, authors do not have to wait until the final article of an issue is published to get their work full published in the journal. Special collections are also what one can call open article collections. Articles are added and published as they are received and accepted. They are initiated, conceptualized, and supervised by guest editors. They are responsible for the content design, participate in the recruitment of authors and reviewers, feedback to contributors, and final publication decisions. Its editors' names are mentioned prominently below the title of each special collection. And then lastly, more thematic foci based on collective contribution can be accommodated within and across issues. This I would say is one of the benefits of special collections, as one could clearly see from HTS if you go to its website. Okay, this brings me then to the call for papers. Just one slide on this. The call for papers was distributed in September 2020 after it was conceptualized and successfully submitted to the editor-in-chief of HTS. It was defined as a South African-German partnership focusing on Africa and Europe. It was intended as a call to scholars across disciplines to address the gap when the religious faith is added to the mix of youth, climate change, and environmental consciousness. We formulated the following research questions to be addressed within this framework. How are youths from various faith communities and religious groups involved in the discourse of environmental issues? How environmentally conscious are they, and how was this environmental consciousness formed? To what extent does their faith influence their environmental consciousness? How are their voices being included in decision-making processes on local, national, or global levels? What impact does the current COVID-19 pandemic have on this theme? Of course, this was then at the time the pandemic. How prominent are climate change and environmental injustice on the agenda of the youth from faith communities and religious groups, especially in the African and European regions? Since young people prior to voting age have little political influence, what ways do youth groups find to influence the political process? How does the rise of youth activism address the issue of climate change and action? So these are the questions that we formulated to give some direction to the special collection.
You have 10 minutes, Prof. Thank you.
Okay. So now the question is, how do we present in the limited space of time like this? How do one present the content of such a special issue? So just to summarize first, 10 articles resulted from the call. 7 South African authors contributed, 2 from Kenya, 2 from Germany. 3 articles were co-authored, and 4 were empirically informed. Of course, I think one wanted more, and I think that is one of the important challenges, to have more empirical work on this. But at least we have had 4 empirically informed contributions. Okay, so this is now how I thought to present it. I'm not sure if my 10 minutes is going to allow it, but let me introduce the authors to you and provide a very brief summary of each contribution. So the first article, so this is the sequence in which the articles were also published. Jacques Beekes, from his field is practical theology. I've already introduced him. He wrote the article Seen and Heard, the Youth as Game-Changing Role Players in Climate Change and Environmental Consciousness, South African Perspective. Article of an explorative nature. We offered a theoretical argument why the youth should be regarded as key agents of climate and environmental activism in South Africa. And he also draws on examples of youth climate activism in South Africa to inform the theoretical argument. I also, in the right-hand column, thought it, to indicate the number of article views to date as part of showing the value of open access. I think the collection was published last year, so 652 views are not too bad. The second contribution was by Marishan van der Westen from UWC, showing our interdisciplinary scope. She's from social work. She published the article, A Realistic Interdisciplinary Approach Towards Environmental Justice and Youth Empowerment. Also a non-empirical article written from the perspective of environmental social work. Her contribution lies in the conceptualization of an interdisciplinary practice framework for social workers to collaborate with faith-based organizations in contributing to the twin goal of youth empowerment and environmental justice. The third article by, actually they are husband and wife. She's at Stellenbosch University, Chantel Weber, husband Brandon Weber. He's more from the world of practice, but he's also has a doctoral degree. The title of the article, in the beginning, God created heavens and the earth. What do science and faith have to do with youth ministry? Also a non-empirical contribution. And one can say the value lies in the conceptual and theoretic value from a practical, theological, and hermeneutical perspective. A theoretical argument is offered on how the youth ministry of churches can draw on scientific knowledge and a particular faith orientation to create environmental awareness among young people. The fourth contribution is by Dr. Eugene Baron. His field is missiology from the University of the Free State. Protecting our environment, the need for South African youth with a mission and Black consciousness. Also a non-empirical contribution. The contribution of the article likewise lies in its conceptual and theoretical value from a hermeneutical and interdisciplinary perspective. A Black theological lens on Black consciousness, a la Biko and Fanon, is applied to advocate how such a consciousness can be drawn upon by churches to create environmental consciousness among South African Black youth. The first contribution by Hannes Snoeser, also from the field of missiology at the University of Pretoria, protecting our environment, the need for South African youth with a mission and Black consciousness. Also non-empirical, the contribution of the article lies in its conceptual and theoretical value from a hermeneutical and missional diaconal theological perspective. Through this lens and taking into account the wide-scale reality of religious faith in Africa, the article theorizes how positive faith formation focused on identity, relations, and values can be employed for the advancement of sustainable development in Africa. Then Garth Aziz from UNISA. He works in the field of practical theology, environmental justice, and act of love, a reflection on the agency of youth on the Cape Flats. Also non-empirical contribution. The contribution of the article lies in its conceptual and theoretical value from a hermeneutical and contextual practical theological perspective. Through this lens, and by taking the contextual realities of the Cape Flats into consideration, the article theorizes about the positive conceptual correlation between environmental justice and social justice and the role that youth on the Cape Flats can play by contributing through their faith actions. The next contribution, our first German contribution, Dr. Thomas Kruk, is in development studies, again showing our interdisciplinary scope. His article is titled Environmental Awareness of Protestant Youth in Germany, Perspective from an Empirical Exploration. And of value also significance that this is our first empirical informed article in the special collection. The article draws on particular data sets to present empirical evidence of environmental awareness among Protestant youth in Germany. An interpretation of the data finds evidence of environmental behavior and attitudes among the selected sample of youth that points to opportunities, but also obstacles for faith-based creation care mediated through church actions. Then our two contributors from Kenya, writing a first of two articles together, an appraisal of the Pentecostal eco-theology and environmental consciousness among youth in Parklands Baptist Church, Kenya. The authors of the article engaged in participant observation and literature research to conduct a case study of the Parklands Baptist Church, a mega Pentecostal congregation in Nairobi, Kenya. The report about an emerging eco-theology at PBC, which is influencing the youth of the congregation towards a growing environmental consciousness and involvement in creation care. The second last contribution, the second German contribution, she's in the works in the field of sociology. And important also that this is a contribution perspective from Islam. A culture and analysis of eco-Islam. We would have liked more of this, but at least we have one. How young German Muslims live religion through environmental activism. This is also empirical. Importantly, the article presents the author's interviews with young eco-Islam activists in Germany and uses the method of culture analysis to interpret the findings. The ultimate argument presented is that the eco-Islamic beliefs and activism of these youth fundamentally transform the way in which they live their religion. Then the last contribution, again by the two contributors from Kenya, environmental consciousness amongst indigenous youth in Kenya, the role of Sengwe religious tradition. Importantly, again, an empirical contribution. The authors of the article present a case study of the Sengwe indigenous community, an ethnic minority in Kenya, to specifically report on the noticeable environmental consciousness among the youth of this community. The essential argument is that the indigenous epistemologies and the religious practices of this community are a determined factor that ensures that its youth are conscious of the environment. Okay, this brings me then to my conclusion. Just two slides. And looking forward, we noted the following in our editorial with regard to our special collection achievement. We believe that interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, and interfaith dialogue is crucially needed at the intersection of theological and religious studies, development studies, the social sciences and humanities more broadly speaking, and the natural sciences. To this end, as a modest beginning to an ongoing collaboration, we have succeeded in attracting a significant, perhaps we should have written a meaningful number of researchers to contribute to this research study. In total, 10 articles are presented. Thus, we planned from the outset that our special collection initiative would be an ongoing collaboration. This ongoing collaboration is today integrated in the South African German Research Hub on Religion and Sustainability, the project that I mentioned at the start, which is driven by the following empirical directed research question. How do religious communities contribute to socio-ecological transition and sustainability? Youth has been identified as one of the target audiences / focus groups within this research framework. We will draw from the special collection outcome to deliver an open access book publication on the topical focus as part of the SAGRA's output. And then the very last slide. On a personal level, I regard the HTS special collection and the continued focus on youth within SAGRA's as an important step forward in my own research trajectory, focusing on youth. On your right-hand side, a book that was published this year, of which I was the project leader. So taking this work and where I am now, moving from researching youth marginalization to researching youth agency by connecting to the religion, environment, ecology nexus. Thank you. Sorry for that it always goes so smoothly. I'm struggling a little bit with the slides.
No
Thank
problem.
you very much.
No problem at all. Thank you very much, Prof. Colleagues, I'll take a few questions if they are. I think there's one comment on the box which I will ask Annalisa to read. Prof, I think you're doing a very good work from religion and theology background and linking it to environmental issues, especially focusing on youth, because I think if youth gets involved, maybe in future we'll be able to to resolve some of the challenges that we're facing currently. And secondly, maybe as a librarian, I was very impressed with your with your citations and the way your literature review was presented. Thank you very much. Annalisa, is there a comment or a question?
Prof, there are no questions currently on the chat, but there is a comment from Dr. Neerpath, and it says, the work you do is so valuable to highlight climate justice activists in youth, whom are our future leaders. Well done.
Thank you very much. I very much appreciate the comment. Now, perhaps I can just add to say, I think that one of the big challenges is, and I think that is where theologians often fall short. We're not well schooled in doing empirical work, and far more empirical work needs to be done on this topic.
Okay. Any other comments, colleagues? We've got 2 more minutes. Okay. Once again, thank you, Prof. Swart. We'll now move to our next speaker, Professor Anusha Vashkaran. Prof, are you now? I can see you. All right. Just a brief introduction about Prof. Anusha. She received her training from Nelson Mandela University, formerly known as University of Port Elizabeth. She has been trained in the field of botany and during ecology. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Her honors master's and PhD focused on different aspects of mangrove forest ecology, the methods, impacts, and patterns of resources utilization of mangrove species in the Eastern Cape region that gave rise to her first scientific papers. She undertook a PhD thesis entitled A Status Assessment of Mangrove Forest in South Africa and the Utilization of Mangrove at Ngazana Estuary, after which she was appointed to the Department of Botany at Rhodes University from October 2011 to November 2015. In December of 2015, Anusha joined the Department of Biodiversity and Conservation Biology at the University of the Western Cape. Her research has expanded to the functioning of other estuarine habitats such as salt marsh and seagrass, provision of ecosystem services, establishing baseline estimates of microplastic and chemical pollutants, and establishing indicators of health of habitats in South Africa. Her research covers mostly parts of the South African coastline, and the research team includes honors, masters, and PhD students, as well as doctoral fellows. Prof, please accept my apology for mispronouncing some of the words. Over to you and welcome.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Alfred, for that kind introduction. I'm going to share my screen. Just let me know that you can see the screen.
Yes, you can see it.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be with all of you today, to be able to talk to you about the importance of accessing information, especially within the realm of climate change and global change in estuaries. So I thought I'd start off with this slide here, with this picture of Hole in the Wall, which is in the Eastern Cape of South Africa. And here you can see a fairly pristine environment that's been enjoyed by a number of different species, with the cattle on the beach, which is very characteristic of the Eastern Cape, as well as people from all parts of society that are coming down to enjoy the visual and aesthetics properties of this particular estuary. What we can see here is the beauty of the estuary, which has its own inherent value. And what we can't see are the ecosystem services that the estuary provides to us as society. So I'd like to just acknowledge the contributions from my postgraduate students as well as collaborators for the information in this presentation. So I'm just waiting for the slide to change. There we go. So here in the next two slides, I'm going to just show you some of the information that's coming out from newspaper articles, from media and social media on what's happening in the estuaries and in the estuarine type environments from around the world. I'm going to introduce what estuaries are in a little bit. But what we can see, and what I'm sure many people have been exposed to, are the different impacts that have affected the communities that live around estuaries. If we just think of the floods that happened within KwaZulu-Natal during the first part of the year, we know that the impacts of those floods are still being felt almost 6 to 7 months after them. And this has resulted in a number of impacts that have altered the state of estuaries within that region, and has resulted in a number of biotic responses. And you can see some of those responses here with the dead fish lying on the banks of the system. Our estuaries lie at the interface between the terrestrial and the marine environment, and therefore they contribute quite significantly to a number of sustainable development goals. And the people that are living around the estuaries can be considered to be very vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, if we think of it in terms of sea level rise and the increase in intensity and quantity of sea storms because of climate change. So there are schools of thought that mangroves can play a major role in helping to alleviate against climate change. We saw that in areas where we have huge storm surges or huge tidal surges, mangroves play a major role in protecting the coastline, as well as protecting the developments behind the mangroves. So cutting down mangroves for things like shrimp or aquaculture, rice and palm oil crops doesn't really pay to protect when it comes to protecting and having mangroves play a role in alleviating climate change. So also in our own backyard, so here we have the Milnerton Lagoon. Quite a few of the estuaries within the Cape Town area are severely being affected by how sewage is moved around and how sewage is treated at our wastewater treatments. And in some cases, the estuaries around our country are becoming toilets because they are used to flush out either treated or untreated wastewater into the marine environment. And of course, that does not only affect the estuary, but as we can see quite clearly here, it also affects the nearshore environment and all the animals and plants that would live in those environments. So we have a lot to deal with, or our estuaries have a lot to deal with around our country. And we know that it's going to take about 8 billion rand to try and start fixing our stinking wastewater and sewage crisis that's within our country. So what is an estuary? When we think about an estuary, and in my introduction, Alfred mentioned the Mgazana estuary in the Eastern Cape. So this is an aerial photo of the Mgazana estuary. Every estuary will have the head of the estuary, which is where the riverine water or the fresh water will enter that system. And that water has a very particular characteristic. It's what we call fresh water, therefore it has low salt, and it has nutrients that are coming into the system that are going to feed into the food web and is going to sustain all the plants and animals you would find in the system. So that's at the head of the estuary. At the other end of the estuary, we have what we call the mouth of the estuary. And this is where the seawater is able to enter the estuary. And of course, seawater we know is very salty. And that salt water is going to enter the estuary and influence any biota you may find. Our intertidal areas, and these are the areas which we would classify as intertidal, would be underwater when that seawater comes into the estuary, and therefore our estuaries contribute both towards life above water and life below water. In these estuaries here, or in this estuary, we have mangrove forests, and these are trees that would be able to live within the estuarine environment and be adapted to those conditions. We also have adjacent vegetation that would also affect the estuarine functioning. So we see here a high level of connectivity of what's happening in the terrestrial environment, what's happening in the marine environment, and at the connection between those, we have the estuarine environment. So in the Mgazana estuary, we see that we have minimal or a low level of development around the estuary, and we can contrast that with estuaries around the east coast of Africa. Here we have Maputo Bay, and Maputo Bay receives water from a number of different estuaries. And if we had to zoom into one of those, we would see a very high level of development around those estuaries. And of course, all of those different kinds of development, whether they are industrial or harbor, urbanization, agriculture or aquaculture, all of those different developments would influence the characteristics of the water, as well as the biota that would live in them. So it's very important to set the context of the estuary and to be able to quantify and qualify the different types of developments that are happening around them. And of course, this leads into where we talk about social justice and climate justice for our coastal communities, because these coastal communities really bear the brunt of particular stresses caused by climate change. So estuaries, as I've tried to explain, are partially enclosed permanent water bodies. So the two examples I have shown you are where the estuary is open to the sea and be influenced by the sea. But we have a large number of estuaries in South Africa where the sea may be blocked off from the estuary, and that's a normal feature. So if you go down to, for example, Sandvlei in Muizenberg, you'll find sometimes of the year the estuary is closed off to the sea, so there's a lot of sand at the mouth, and other times where the seawater is allowed to come in and the mouth is open. So all of those different states of the estuary can be normal states for that particular system. We also know that when an estuary comes down in a flood or goes through a high flow regime from the freshwater side, the estuary can become a river mouth where the actual estuary is out to sea, and the amount of freshwater is actually influencing the characteristic of the seawater. Globally, the definitions of estuaries is quite variable, and we see a great diversity in morphology, geomorphology, as well as hydrology of estuaries around the world. And therefore, the global definitions would differ from what we have in South Africa compared to what you may find in the United States of America, for example. And here I just wanted to show you the different characteristics of estuaries. If we compare along our South African coastline, it's quite a diverse coastline because of the different currents that are present. So here on the boundary between South Africa and Mozambique, we would have Corsi Bay. And Corsi Bay is one of the only tropical estuaries in the country, and therefore it has a very unique biota. It has biota, plants and animals that we wouldn't find anywhere else in the country. And therefore it contributes greatly to biodiversity for the country. In this particular system, we have mangrove species that we don't find anywhere else along the country. We also have particular coral reefs that we wouldn't find any further south of Cozy Bay. So a very unique and a very special system. And again, a lot of different types of communities and different cultures are found around the Cozy Bay estuarine lake system. And a lot of different conflicts can arise between the different agencies that are trying to conserve, protect, and sustainably use the system. On the other side of our coastline in the Northern Cape, we have the Orange River, and this is a fluvially dominated system, meaning that it's dominated by riverine processes. And here we can see that it lies within a desert environment. And of course, we know the Orange River runs through most of South Africa and is highly affected by all the industries that we find along its pathway. So the water at the head of the river that runs into the Orange is very different to the water that comes through the estuary. And it could be influenced by different factors such as agriculture, industry, as well as mining. So on the extreme parts of our country, we have Cozy Bay and the Orange River, and between those we have approximately 300 different types of estuaries. And these are estuaries that we have tried to classify into different categories in order to better manage them. And this is where the importance of open access and information and access to information really becomes important in order to manage sustainably the different types of estuaries that we have. We need to be able to access important data, and we need to be able to package that data in a meaningful way that will allow for adequate management and ensuring health of both the estuary, while also taking care of the different communities that are living around those estuaries and that are dependent on those estuaries. So here we have the different estuarine types. I won't go into them in too much detail, but really the message is that there's a diversity of estuaries within just our country, and those estuaries contribute almost 4 billion rand to the economy through their ecosystem services. So they cannot be ignored. And if we do ignore them, it would be to our own peril, because our health is linked to the health of these systems. So here I wanted to focus in on climate change, because I was asked to speak about climate change in the context of estuaries. So on this side of the slide, I have the planetary boundaries framework, which helps us to define what are the safe parameters in which we can safely live on the planet, and how many of those have been exceeded and that are now creating an unsafe environment. So for example, we have freshwater change. So how do we use our fresh water? We have climate change, we have novel entities, and we have the biogeochemical cycles. So all of these, currently we are exceeding our planetary boundaries for each of these aspects, making life on Earth very difficult for some people more than for other people. When we talk about climate change stresses, we want to talk about climate and land and hydrological processes, ocean circulation and temperature regimes. And of course, when we think about climate change, I think most people will think about temperature because of the link to global warming. We also may be thinking a little bit more about sea level rise and its relationship to increased coastal storms. We saw recently in the United States with the tidal surge that came in with the latest hurricanes and the devastation it caused to the urban development along the coastline. We also have ocean acidification, and this is not something a diversity of the society, groups of society would think about. But very recently, we've started to try to understand how does ocean acidification affect the seafood that we all, or most of us, like to enjoy? How does it change the taste of our seafood? How is it going to change the availability and abundance of our seafood? And this is starting to become more at the forefront of society's mind. Of course, when we think about these and we think about open access, what generally comes to mind is our ability to predict. So if we think about the South African Weather Services and the warning systems, the early warning systems that they usually are putting out, it's that access to data and information that's really driving that ability to be both effective and efficient in the way we are able to predict what's going to happen on a day-to-day, what's going to happen from different seasons, and what can we expect from our coastal storms in terms of quantity and intensity. From there, we can then start to look at what are the biotic processes that are going to be affected by the different aspects of climate change stresses. And this is where some of my work becomes more relevant. So we can look at our biotic processes in terms of primary production. And you may think, well, I'm sitting in my house right now. I don't really need to care about primary producers. We all need to care about primary producers because without them, really life on Earth would not exist. These are the primary producers that are sustaining our food webs, and any changes to their level of productivity is going to change the rest of the habitat and the rest of the ecosystems. We can also look at it in terms of habitat forming plants. So here's an example. I can tell you about the mangrove forest. Mangroves with climate change are in some parts of the world starting to expand, meaning that they are moving into places where you wouldn't usually find them. And that's starting to occur in some of our estuaries in South Africa. Eutrophication is something that we can all imagine, because not only can we see it, we also smell it, and it influences the way the biota respond when eutrophication is happening. This is a process where when we have a high level of nutrients coming into an estuary, those nutrients usually trigger the primary producers in terms of your phytoplankton. Those phytoplanktons will use up all of that nutrients and increase in quantity. Over time, once the nutrients are depleted or are reduced, the primary producers die. And when they decompose, they drop the amount of oxygen that is present within the ecosystem. And this is when we start to smell eutrophication. So if you are near a water body that's been that's undergoing eutrophication, not only will you smell it, you will also see it in the number of dead fish, very similar to the slide I showed you at the start, where the fish start to die off because the amount of oxygen present is no longer viable for life. Recruitment and nursery function is something that's quite important in terms of sustaining our populations of biota that we depend on, such as fisheries. The way climate change will affect recruitment is changes in reproduction, the squeezing of available habitat, and the presence and quality of the nursery function. And then, of course, we know that community composition and the behavior of some animals will change. In terms of community composition, we would have animals that are unable to adapt to a changing environment, either undergoing local extinction or being reduced in terms of their population, or we may find an extension or expansion of populations to new areas. So all of these climate stresses that were in the previous slide can have an impact on these different components. So when we talk about climate change and the need to mitigate against climate change, we can start to look at, and we should start to look at, nature-based solutions. So we know that nature-based solutions are actions that will protect sustainably manage and restore natural or modified ecosystems. And this will address not just the ecosystem health, but societal challenges, as well as provide human well-being and biodiversity benefits. So estuaries and their habitats such as mangroves, salt marshes, and seagrasses can be used in order to try and achieve these particular objectives. So when we look at estuarine ecosystem services, and as I mentioned before, we can quantify in terms of monetary value how these systems or how these services benefit society. So our estuaries in South Africa contribute 4 billion rand every year to the economy because they provide these ecosystem services. And these services include allowing fresh water to flow into the marine environment, the nursery function where mangroves, salt marshes, and seagrasses provide shelter and protection, as well as food provision to different fish and other biota. Carbon sequestration, which I'll talk a little bit more. Carbon sequestration is linked to plants being able to synthesize and to take up carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, convert that into biomass. And when that biomass falls onto the sediment, blue carbon habitats such as mangroves, salt marshes, and seagrasses are able to store the carbon in the sediment, and it becomes a sink of carbon for a very long time. And of course, if we can use this to reduce the amount of carbon in the atmosphere, that would help to mitigate against climate change. But that is just one part of the mitigation strategy. It cannot be the sole factor that we use to mitigate against climate change. And then, of course, flood regulation and protection, the provision of safe bathing areas, and the provision of different food, fuel, and building resources are all contributed by estuaries. So if we look at carbon sequestration, so here I just wanted to show you some graphs that we have been collecting from the Berg estuary, which is in Veldrift, here in the Western Cape. And Veldrift, or the Berg estuary, is a very important system because it has some of the largest areas of salt marsh in South Africa. And it has a great diversity of salt marsh species, and therefore it contributes to ecosystem services that are benefited from by South Africa. So here, if we are looking at the amount of carbon that we would find within the sediment for different species. So these are different salt marsh species, and what you really need to look at is at the top part of our sediment or the soil profile, we have quite high levels of percentage carbon in our organic matter. So if we look at Swartina and Juncus, Salicornia, Tegeteria, and Bassia, Phragmites, and Salicornia, most of them have either between 10 and 20 or around 10% carbon in their organic matter. If we had to degrade those different ecosystems, and by degrading, I mean that if we convert them to salt pans, if we allow erosion to take place, if we allow farming within the flood zone or the intertidal area, if we allow walkways to occur within those systems, what we're actually doing is we are reducing the capacity of those different habitats to store carbon. And if we are interested, and we should be interested in carbon sequestration and carbon sinks, we should really try to avoid any of these activities within the estuarine environment. And that's because mangroves, salt marshes, and seagrasses play a role in climate mitigation through natural-based solutions. And here we find in this top graph just the above ground matter. So that's just how much of the plant can you actually see. And again, as we go to the different factors that are reducing the salt marsh, the biomass is close to zero, and most of that area becomes converted into bare ground. Areas that are bare ground within an estuary generally do not have high ecosystem services. They are not useful in terms of protection against storms. They are not useful in terms of nursery function, or as we can see in these graphs, they are not useful in terms of carbon sequestration. So the ability to protect and conserve and to sustainably manage our salt marsh areas, mangroves, and seagrasses will help us to ensure that our ecosystem services are safeguarded into the future. So I wanted to bring in 2 examples of blue carbon projects. And when we talk about blue carbon, we're talking about habitats that I've mentioned. These are mangroves, salt marshes, and seagrasses that we generally find within estuaries or in close relation to the marine environment. And we can see that these blue carbon projects go hand in hand with social justice as well as climate justice. And this is because we now know through data, through our research and data, the rate at which carbon can be sequestrated by a hectare of mangroves or a hectare of seagrass, and we're getting closer to what it would be for a hectare of salt marsh. So bringing together information and data from around the world, because these rates differ, the rate of carbon sequestration in South Africa is very different to that of Kenya, as well as what it would be in Australia or even in Southeast Asia. So it's very important for us to gather data from different areas of the world and have access to that information to make these decisions. So in Kenya, thanks, Alfred. In Kenya, we know that we have a project called Mikoko Pomoja, and here they are able to sell carbon credits, and they have been selling carbon credits at a rate of $12,000 per year. And this is something that the project will run for over 20 years, and they are able to sell over 3,000 tons of carbon dioxide. Now, what does that mean? They are using afforestation, meaning planting of new mangroves and conservation of mangroves, to be able to say that if we are able to do this, we can sequester 3,000 tons of carbon. And you can pay us to do that, to offset your carbon footprint that you may have for your company or for your personal self or for your personal travel. So this is using the carbon market in order to protect, conserve, and increase the area of mangroves within Gazi Bay, which is in Kenya. The profits are then spent by different communities. And there's a community forum that exists. So the activities and the profit sharing is agreed upon by the community association and is based on local needs as well as capabilities. And if you're interested in this, you can go to this particular link and it will show how these activities are linked to the Sustainable Development Goals. So of course, projects like this will contribute to life above water, life below water, climate change, no poverty because it's generating income for the community, as well as reducing inequalities. Now, I've put a different project at the bottom here, and this is when the opposite, unfortunately, happened, when a similar project was tried to be initiated in Tanzania. So this project up here is from Kenya. This one is from Tanzania in the refugee delta. And here what was happening was, because the climate or because a blue carbon project was starting, it led to forced removals of indigenous peoples as well as threatened its livelihoods. So it's very important to set up these projects in a way that allows all the people to be equal stakeholders in the project as well as in the profit sharing for those areas. I wanted to just bring it back to microplastics. I did mention microplastics was mentioned in my biography. So at UWC, we are setting up a microplastics lab And this microplastics lab is going to help us to provide a baseline of information of how microplastics are being spread throughout the South African coastal environment. So again, I go back to the planetary boundaries. Plastics fall under novel entities. And you can see here very clearly, these novel entities, as well as other pollutants, have far exceeded the safe operating space that we would want to maintain it in. So these novel entities are different pollutants, of which plastics and microplastics are one of them. And here we have some examples of microplastics that we find within the estuarine environment. In these two diagrams, what we actually saw was the way the estuary is used will affect the diversity and the quantity of microplastics that we would find in those areas. So here we have St. Lucia, which is more ecotourism driven, compared to Isipingo in KwaZulu-Natal, which is highly developed in terms of industry, as well as urbanization. And we found very different levels of microplastics between those two systems. We've also been able to look at how those microplastics are being taken up by different biota. So this is some data provided by a postdoctoral fellow, Trisha Naidu, who looked at different fish species within different areas and counted the amount of microplastics he would find. So 52% of the fish contained microplastics, and the highest number of plastics were found in a fish in a harbor area. And of course, we know harbors are going to be sinks as well as sources for different kinds of pollutants. So information and data like this can be very useful in this kind of initiative. So here we have what we call GLOVE, the Global Plastic Ingestion Initiative. And this website brings together data from a variety of sources and information, and tries to help us to understand the spread and sinks and sources of microplastics, as well as what kind of biota are being affected by those microplastics. So this is Trishan's work that is on this particular website. This kind of website can also help us to prioritize research, which biota need to be looked at that have been ignored previously. We can then also try to prioritize depending on diets of different communities that live in estuarine and coastal environments. So having this kind of information is very beneficial to us. So we have also used our estuarine data to contribute to the National Biodiversity Assessment, where we can provide, we can package information for policymakers, provide key messages, and open access has a great potential to improve this. And it will also help us to understand the drivers, pressures, states, impacts, and responses of our different estuarine habitats. So open access and climate change really helps us to improve our accuracy and improves climate models. It gives us the opportunity to create new early warning systems that reduces loss of life and reduces damages. It helps us to understand changes in biodiversity and extinction rates. And of course, visibility of research creates opportunities to collaborate and learn quicker. It allows us to keep with pace and know where we are in terms of climate change. And of course, in order to mitigate climate change, science really has to be translated into policy. So there are a greater number of advantages. So I think everybody would have gotten an email if they are producing research from Elsevier to show how much or how many downloads have occurred for an open access article and what sustainable development goals those particular articles contribute to. So there are great advantages. My colleagues came, when I was preparing for this lecture, gave me some interesting insights into the disadvantages, of course, the costs, which Professor Frans did mention. There's also a great deal of suspicion. Quite a few colleagues are concerned about the quality of reviews with rejection rates being quite a bit lower for some open access journals. And of course, there's other ways to access information and access publications, as was mentioned by the first speaker. So this is just in closing, a quote from one of my colleagues who gave an example of rushing the review and article processing for quite a high impact journal, and it left her questioning the quality of reviews that come out of that journal. In terms of open access and climate change, open access generates more research interest and hopefully makes information easily accessible to our resource managers. So I think going forward, UWC could really, and the library services could really play a major role in advising academics and researchers about open access, the measures and methods to ensure quality, how we can try and overcome the costs. And of course, this shouldn't just be limited to academics, but also to our undergrad and postgraduate students. And with that, just another pretty picture. I'd like to thank you for listening, and I hope you have a lovely day. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anusha. That was educational presentation. There's quite a few things that personally I was not aware of. But while maybe I was just waiting for questions, if there's a question coming up, I would like to know what is it maybe that you are doing, or people within your team, are doing to ensure that this research goes out there. It's not just kept in our academic, if I can call it academic circles, like in research papers and maybe within the classrooms. Are there initiatives that you try to implement in the communities so that they can learn about all these issues?
Yes, so sometimes we're a bit slow on transferring our articles into something that's more translatable to society. So just this week, I gave a radio interview talking about estuaries and their impact on the economy of South Africa and the threats. We recently wrote for The Conversation on microplastics in estuaries, and we try to contribute to the National Biodiversity Assessment, which is really about translating science to policy, especially. But I would have to say we don't have any formalized programs to really translate our science into something far more useful for greater society and not just for knowledge development.
Thank you. I think we have a few comments or questions from the chat. Melissa?
Yes, thank you, Prof. There's 3 questions currently. One is, are there any other challenges to information gathering and sharing on estuaries, and how could these be addressed?
So information gathering, sometimes what we find is that once a study has been done and the data is not maybe released to scientists. So there's a huge influence and a huge push to allow for data to be registered into directories so that other people can use that data. And of course, a lot of scientists would be afraid that the data may be published without them. So that sometimes causes a barrier. And then, of course, so collaboration is very important, and being open to collaboration, both within the country as well as globally, that could ensure information sharing happens in a more meaningful way.
Thank you, Prof. That question was from Joseph Mangadi. The second question from Magwaza is asking, how can the quality of open access be increased?
Yeah, so from my point of view, I think scientists have to play a very cautionary role in which journals they are publishing in, making sure that the journal is reputable, it is subsidized, it is reviewed properly. And And there's a lot of websites, and of course the library department can help us quite a lot in understanding the difference between a high publishing journal or a good quality journal and a predatory journal. So I think those, from a researcher point of view, you've got to be aware of those. From a publisher point of view, really doing justice to the review system is going to increase the quality of open access, and using reputable reviewers is also going to assist in that.
Okay, Prof. Third question is asking, so you mentioned that part of the role of open access is to help with predictions on climate change. So could the KZN floods have not been avoided, or at least minimize the damage through cautioned flood control or early warning systems?
So I mean, when those floods occurred, I remember 2 or 3 days, maybe 2 days before the floods occurred, the climate models were already showing that a high amount of rain, a catastrophic amount of rain, was coming to the Durban area. Now, weather models can't give you that information a month in advance. It can't even give it to you 2 weeks in advance. It happens at an interval that's got a low amount of time for communities to be able to respond. But having those 2 to 3 days gives you an edge. And I know in Cape Town we do have those early warning systems where it warns people in low-lying areas that the floods are coming. The floods in Durban are really not something that we could have predicted in terms of its intensity. We know high intensity storms and floods are going to be increasing, but that level, and to have 2 of those floods within a very low time scale, was really unprecedented. And of course, if we look at development within KwaZulu-Natal and within the Durban area, the way development has been structured is not conducive to protecting communities because of the lack of planning that has gone into place. So as much as we've created these weather models to help us to predict when these events are happening, it then has to go to the people who can make decisions about how that information can be used to safeguard against loss of life, and loss of infrastructure.
Thank you, Prof. Just a comment from Denise Nicholson that thanks to both speakers, very interesting and informative presentations. Then her question is, has the current copyright law been a barrier in your research?
Not that I can say so. Not that I have had to engage directly with legal services or other entities to do that. I think what I really have to be aware of, and what my students have to be aware of, is this constant barrage of emails that comes through that tries to get you to publish in non-sanctioned journals, or tries to get you to collaborate with people that may not be interested in high quality research. So I haven't come across any entities or any experiences where I've clashed directly with the copyright law. And thank you for the link to the predatory publishing practices. Thanks for that.
We actually, as a library, that's one of the areas we deal with them, quite often. We do receive queries from the researchers, as they've been invited to attend a conference, and while it's a predatory conference, they have to pay money upfront to publish in very obscure, journals. But within our resources, we do manage to do investigation and then to say, no, stay away from it. And as Dennis has also shared some links, those links may help, but the library is available if you need any assistance. Colleagues, I think we've come to the end of Anusha's slot, and she got more than 40 seconds for in terms of the questions.
Thank you.
I will take any question now for the, our three speakers are still around. If there's any burning question for any of the three speakers before I introduce my boss to do the closing remarks. Annalisa, something there?
There's nothing. Okay, something just came in from Peladi. The low achievement in MDGs and subsequently the low achievements in SDGs has led to linking the 2030 development framework with data revolution. How is the UWC library assisting the country to achieve this?
Is that question directed to us as the library?
It doesn't say who it's directed to, but it's asking how is the UWC library assisting the country to achieve this?
Okay, it sounds like a political question. I'm not sure what is MDGs, but
Millennium Development Goals.
Millennium Development Goals.
Yes.
Okay, and subsequent the low achievement of SDGs led to the linking of 2030 developmental format with data revolution. How is the UWC library assisting the country to achieve this? I don't have an answer to this. I could say we as UWC library, like any other library, what we try to do is to ensure that our research is out there through open access. That's why we're here today. And you must remember that the library is just a vehicle to facilitate access. But the people who are doing research, the people who have to contribute mostly on the SDGs are the researchers. They are the ones who who make the difference. As a library, all we want to ensure is to make sure the research that is produced by UWC researchers impacts on the society or the community at large, by making sure that it is available on open access. By also maybe on our Figshare, for instance, we had a field whereby if there are recordings that, let's say, Anusha was interviewed by 702 or other station, and then we can put those on our Figshare, so that people can access that information in the future. I don't know if there's another question. Shalene, are you ready for your term, or do you want to comment on this?
Yes, I think it is the question about the UWC library promoting the data revolution. I think the one critical thing is, how do we as a library also encourage our researchers and academics to upload their data, and then we have the Figshare. So the library also has Figshare, and so we also encourage, but we find that there's very minimal or low kind of request for data that goes on our Figshare. Most of our authors are very suspicious or cautious about uploading their data, and they also maybe need a lot of encouragement in that aspect. But in terms of the data, we do need to make data open as possible, and so we as a library, we have the platform available and ready, but I think it's also like the uptake from our researchers about uploading their data. And as librarians will tell you, there's huge resistance about data uploading. So therefore, the link to SDGs and all that, there's lots and lots of work that we need to do collectively in the institution so that we promote exposure, open access, and knowledge systems.
Okay, thank you, Shalene. I think while maybe you're on the floor, I'm just looking at the time. Maybe this is the opportunity time for you to close, unless there's one last question. Maybe just to link from what Shalene was saying in terms of the repository. Yes, we do have a data repository, but I know for the fact that there are disciplinary specific, data repositories, which especially I know in science, the scientists prefer to use them. Maybe our role as a lab is how do we link the metadata from those data repositories to our own repository? Because we do not want to mandate researchers to, to give their data to the lab, and that's not how it functions. But I guess we can link our own institutional repository, data repository to the disciplinary repository. In any event, our data repository cannot, we don't have the space to house some of the information in astrophysics and in other fields, which they have very big data sets. And Annalise, are there any other comments there?
Yes, there was a comment from Mark, which has added to the fact that the library supports RDM with the training of researchers as well as the administration of the research data repository, which is GitHub. So a follow-up question from Magwaza is asking, do you think the RDM policy will help the uptake, and is directed to Dr. Neerpat? Do you think the RDM policy will help the uptake of the research data?
But I think I've already kind of partly answered that, because we do have a RDM policy, as you know, since last year, since 2021. As I'm saying, it's not more about how many data sets you have, but it's how much access you can provide, you can facilitate for, for other people to make sure they get access to the data. Colleagues, I think we've come to the end of the program. I'll just now hand over to Dr. Neerpat, who's the Director of Library Services at UWC, to give us a word of thanks and conclude the program. Thank you very much. Over to you, Chabi.
Thank you, Alfred. So warm greetings, colleagues, and I am so excited that all of you stayed the duration of the such an interesting, insightful presentation. I do want to acknowledge each and every one of you for being here, and I'm sure you've gleaned a lot of interesting facts and interesting information and added to your own knowledge. But so I have a very easy task this morning of actually thanking our presenters. Firstly, I'd like to thank our program director, Melody, and her team. And then I'd like to thank Mr. Alfred and Toli and the competent librarians for this exciting and insightful presentation on open access, open for climate justice. And then I would also like to acknowledge and thank the knowledgeable Denise Nicholson, who was the previous librarian at WITS and continues to advocate for copyright, fair use criteria, and South Africa subscribes to the Marrakesh Treaty, which facilitates access for the physically challenged in our country. And the work that Denise and the librarians do in terms of copyright is phenomenal. Also, in fact, it is very critical to acknowledging and open access and open resources, and the way that we expose our publications in this way. So Denise, as usual, with all the law, history that you have and all of that, I continue to learn so much more. Thank you very much. And then I want to thank Professor Ignace Swart, who's addressed the neglected terrain of youth in climate justice. And so how often do we actually think about the faith organizations in our ongoing research, and as a university, do we engage the youth on ecological injustices? Thank you so much, Professor Swart. Your work is so valuable, and honestly, I really like that the library would engage with you further on the work that you do, because at the end of the day, we all serve the youth in our universities, and the youth are the future of our country. So in terms of social justice, climate justice, let's build the knowledge and let's make everybody aware around climate justice and the impact it has. Otherwise, we'll erode our own society and create our own suicide in that regard. And then Professor Anusha Rajkaran from the Faculty of Natural Sciences. I was just so blown away by, firstly, the impact of accessing information to the global and climate change in estuaries. And the pictures, you just brought so much insights by your real life pictures and the everyday impact that, is in estuaries and that effects on our climate, on our society. In me, also eating the fish and what am I eating. So thank you for bringing to all of the participants that information and that knowledge. And I think it's so critical we understand the social and the climate justice for our coastal life. And how do we as a university promote that? I know Alfred said it's his boss, but my boss, the knowledgeable Professor Franz, and she looked stunning today on our open access program, also talked about, what is it that the university and how can we add value in our research and impact on society. And that is something that we all should be gearing for, is making our lives so much more enriched by becoming and encouraging the sustainable development goals. I also, I think I want to also acknowledge in the among the participants that you have given us the blue carbon projects and the GLOVE initiatives that we can certainly engage with. We can certainly add more, encourage our users in the university from the library perspective. And yes, colleagues, I can go on, but it has been certainly an exciting and really something that I never knew all of these things are existent until we had these amazing presentations from our colleagues. I sincerely like to thank each and every one of you, and I wish that we could meet one day so that we could just share the smiles and the work that we do, and appreciate everything that that you have done to make our lives much more better and enriched. Thank you all, and I hope I have covered everybody in the vote of thanks, Alfred. And I also want to acknowledge my librarians for pushing open access, for the work that they do. And it certainly isn't an easy job, but thank you so much for everyone in open access. And I can say together we can achieve so much more in showcasing our research, in showcasing our librarians and our authors on the internet. And that's what open access is all about, is we bringing home research for an impactful society. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Shalini. Thank you, colleagues.